And welcome, students. We are now starting Adobe Photoshop. Photoshop is an app that some of you might be familiar with in terms of at least the name recognition. For example, when you hear stories about people who have something Photoshopped so it doesn't make them look like they should. We're not going to get too much into some of that stuff. We'll do a little bit, but mostly we're going to look at some of the different imaging capabilities that Photoshop can do and some of the different techniques and stuff that you can apply. So let's get started here by first going into Photoshop. You see that this is the app. This is the 2017 version, so it's very similar to the 2015 version if you have that, or 18 or any other version. Just some minor tweaks here and there. So I'm going to go ahead and open up an image to get started here. Now I'm not going to go ahead and make a new document yet. I'm going to start with an existing one. So this Norway.jpg can be found right on my lesson plan, so you can go ahead and download that there. And once I open that image, it just takes it a second for Photoshop to render it. And you can see here is our image right here. There's a couple different things that are existing here. So for example, you'll see over here is the layers panel. And you'll want to get very familiar with the layers panel. We did a little bit with layers in Illustrator, but not really too much. But in Photoshop, the layers panel is king. So you're really going to want to get familiar with where this is and some of these different buttons down here. We'll explore these as we work through Photoshop. You'll also notice that there's some icons here that we have seen but are not have familiarized with. For example, there's this little eye right here. This eye represents the visibility. So if I click that eyeball, it will, right now it does nothing because this layer is locked. But if this layer was not locked, if I click the eyeball, you would not see that layer. And this icon right here just means this layer is locked. If I double click the lock icon, you can see that it's no longer locked. Just close that. And now I should be able to freely come in and manipulate those layers. I'm just going to do an undo real quick though, so I can return it back to the locked background layer. Now usually one of the first things I always do is I just remove that locked background simply because it makes it easier for me when working with an image because I don't have to worry about a layer being locked down for one reason or another. So I'm just going to go ahead for now and unlock that by just double clicking on it. Close that. And you can see that changes it from background to layer 0. And see if I click on the eyeball, you can see that image has disappeared. All right. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to get ready to work with one of the most basic photo editing features, which is that of the crop tool. And the crop tool can be found right here. All right. And as soon as I click on it, you'll notice that we have these small handlebars appear around the image. All right. So if I go ahead and I can drag the image in, I can drag the crop tool around, you can see that as I do that, it manipulates the size of the crop field of where it is. I can even grab hold of the image itself and move the crop field around within it. So the crop tool is very powerful here, and that just you can see that that is going to be a new cropped image. One thing I want to kind of point out here is all these kind of grayed out areas. Those are the pixels that are going to be chopped off when I crop this. Now, with most traditional crops, when you crop something and you finalize that crop, anything that would be outside of this cropped area is, for all intents and purposes, gone. But Photoshop actually has the power to keep those there. Right? And if we look up here along our toolbar, we see quite a few different tools. I'm not going to go through all of them right now, but one of the first ones I want to point out to you is the Delete Crop Pixels tool. So if I uncheck that, what that's going to do is when I crop this, I can drag this around here on my image in order to still have those pixels there in case if I wanted to move where the crop was, I don't have to completely start over. I can actually just drag that image around inside the crop. Additionally, up here, you'll see there's a thing for ratio. And in here, you have a bunch of different dimensions and sizes in here. So these are really good here for print. You can see PPI in here. You also have ratios in here. One of the good ones, if you want to maintain the aspect ratio of the image, you can go to original ratio. And what that's going to do, it's going to constrain the crop. So no matter what I do, it doesn't flex all over the place. But it helps constrain that crop to be something a little bit more precise. So I'm just going to go ahead and leave this crop. I'm going to actually just bring it up a little bit. And I'm going to have it crop right about there. And then when I'm ready to crop, I can either come up here. You can see I have several different options. This is to cancel. This is to complete. It's just kind of an undo action there. So like if I do that, it resets the last action. But I'm going to go put back to original ratio. And I'm just going to pull this crop in going to eliminate a little bit of the water there. And this is what I'm going to work with. All right, I can press this button here to commit to the current crop operation, or I can press the Enter key on my keyboard, which also does the same thing. Now, before we proceed with doing anything more on this image, let me just go over here to the selection tool here. And if I click on this image and I drag it around, you can see that the stuff that I cropped off before still exists. If I had done this with a regular photo editing program, for example, like Paint, and do that crop, this stuff that would be outside the edges here would be gone forever. I would not be able to, I might be able to drag it around, but it would just end up with a kind of border like you see right here, this kind of white and gray transparency. But we don't want that, because then if I need to adjust this, like I say, I want to see a little bit more of those houses, or I want maybe just a little less beachfront, that's what this will allow me to do. Or maybe I want a little more beachfront. That's a nice thing about the crop feature here. Now, before I do anything more, what I want to do is I want to save this so that way I don't lose my work, because you never know what can happen in computing. So let's just go up here, we're going to go File, we're going to Save As, and let's go ahead and navigate to our N drive. We're going to our Cat2 folder, and we're going to go ahead and save this. All right, now this is our first Photoshop exercise, so I'm just going to call this Photoshop-intro, and you just leave everything else the way it is and click on Save. If this menu comes up here, just click on OK. All right, and so now you'll see that that image has been renamed to Photoshop-intro.psd. PSD means that this is a Photoshop document here. When we're all done with this document, what we're actually going to export it as a photo, but we're not going to do that yet. All right, so let's get ready to start doing some stuff with this image. So remember how I said we want to start getting familiar with this layers panel? Well, let's start doing some work with it. Down here, you'll see we have a bunch of different things. We're going to start here with some adjustments, and in this adjustments, if I click on that, it's this black and white circle down here. We have a bunch of different things in here. We're going to go right to brightness and contrast. So when I click on brightness and contrast, it brings up this window here, and you can see that it's also added this layer right here into our layers panel. Now, inside of this document here, this is still our original image. I can go ahead and mess around with the brightness and contrast. And what brightness does, increases the amount of light that's saturated into the image, whereas contrast will change the black and white ratio. So if I just, for example, start messing around with brightness, you can see as I pull that slider to the right, it makes the image a lot brighter because there's a lot more sunlight. Whereas I slide it the other way, it makes it a lot darker. Now notice even if I take it to the max value, it doesn't make it pitch black. Right. If I do contrast, if I slide that slider, you can see if I move it one way or another, see this way is making it a lot more gray. This way made it a lot more dark. Now, Photoshop does have some nice things in it. For example, you can see right here there's an auto button. So if I click on auto, what it's going to do is tell Photoshop, hey, I want you to automatically go to try to adjust the brightness and contrast in this image. And you can see that once I click that, it went ahead and did that. And this image right now to me looks a little bit too kind of dark for my liking. So I might say, hey, well, I don't want so much contrast. I'm going to actually peel that back slightly there. And maybe I want just a little bit more brightness. Maybe I want it to look a little bit brighter. So I can still go in and manually adjust those. Now, even when I'm doing this, even if I left it at those default values, if I click this icon right down here with the eyeball, I can see the before and after and just see how much different those two images are. Additionally, if I think that this is too strong, there's also an opacity right here. So if I click under the opacity, I can actually change the opacity value of that filter I just applied here with brightness and contrast. I'm just going to go ahead and leave that here at about 93%. Okay. So there's my new image. And I'm just going to hit this arrow here to collapse the brightness and contrast for now. All right, now some of these colors are still kind of dull looking, and we want to kind of make them a little bit more vibrant. So to do that, we're going to go back down here to our adjustments, and I'm going to this time choose Hue and Saturation. And when I do that, we have a different window come up now, and I have some new sliders that I can go ahead and manipulate around with. So I want to maybe zoom this in a little bit. So I'm just going to, if I use Control Plus, I can zoom that in. And in here, I can adjust these values. So the hue will adjust the RGB values, so that makes it either more red, more blue, more green. Saturation is the amount of a particular color is saturated. And of course, lightness is kind of self-explanatory. What I wanted to affect right now is the saturation values. I want those colors to be a lot richer. So if I grab that slider and I start pulling that, you can see that as I start pulling it, the colors immediately start popping up. Now if I slam it all the way, you can see we get some really crazy effects going on here. It looks almost like some psychedelic trip. But I don't want quite all that much going, because you see the colors really start to bleed at 100 saturation. All right. So if I just go ahead and reset that to 0, and I just want to show you real quick what the hue will do. So if I start playing around with hue, if I make this more towards the red end, you can see we really start making kind of more of a bluish purple kind of hue to our image. If I spin it the other way, you can see that the image gets a little bit more towards the green end of the spectrum. Okay, so I'm just going to leave that as is, put that back to 0. And if I affect the lightness value, you can see that just is a straight up, it floods the page with white, whereas this will make the page completely dark. Again, I'm going to leave that one right now for 0. So with the saturation, I wanted to see a little bit of color pop. So I'm going to bring that up. I don't want it, again, I don't want it all the way up, because you can see that makes it a little too bright. Almost makes it look kind of cartoony. So I'm going to kind of leave it right here around, I put plus 48. That's a good value there. And I'm going to go ahead and collapse that. Now we do have some colors here that are maybe just still a little bit hair off, and we can go through and manually adjust that. Down here, we have these little panels that we've been doing. And we're going to get ready in a second here to apply a layer mask in order to adjust those pieces that are still off. So over here, you'll see that there's this little bracket around this kind of white filter here. What that means is that that's hue and saturation is the current layer mask that is selected. And what we want to do is, because this is a white mask here, I want to go over here to my swatches here. And by default, it's set to either white or black. We always want, if we want to let something through a layer mask, we want to make it the opposite color of what this layer mask is. So if this is white, this needs to be on top black. And you can see right now that's white. So what I'm going to do to reset that is I can actually just see this double-headed arrow right here. If I click that, it swaps those two colors. So I'm going to go to my brush tool, which is right here. And I'm also going to go to the top. And what I want to do is adjust that size. Let's take it up to something like, do something pretty close to 150, doesn't to be exact. And something like a nice soft tip there. See, kind of glowy one's a little bit softer. And I'm just going to press enter. And you can see I have this nice size brush here that I can go ahead and use. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and try to paint through these areas. Now you see as I paint over that grass area there, because I said the grass is a little too dark, I can go ahead and paint through an area. Now if I keep painting on it, you'll notice it doesn't make any additional difference. Right? But when I let go, you'll see that down here there's now this like kind of almost like little black box area. And what that does is it gives me some indication of where that area was that I painted through. So I can of course get a lot more fine in here. I can zoom in on this, for example, if I wanted to really try to hone in on some of these. And I can go back to that brush tool and I can keep painting. Now, I might say that brush tool is a little too big. Well, then I can use the left and right brackets on my keyboard to adjust that brush size. If I use the right bracket, it will make the brush size bigger. But if I use the left bracket, it can actually make it smaller. So if I want to get a little bit more closer to maybe some of these trees here, I can go in and paint along those trees and maybe along the edge of these houses here, because I don't want that grassy hill back here to look quite so bright. I might want that to be a little bit more subdued. Or maybe I don't want as much reflection here on the water, so I can go ahead and increase the size of that. And I can go ahead and just paint over that to decrease that. Now, let's just say that I said I accidentally made a brush stroke across this house here. And I'm like, oh no, what did I do? Well, I can do a Control Z to undo it. Or if I hold down the Alt key, you can see it changes to a color picker. All right, my quickest suggestion, if it's something you quickly did, just Control Z and it will bring it back. All right. Now, just one last thing here before we move on to the next item. If you want to look at how this image has changed, let's just do a Control 0 and it takes this out. If I want to look at this compared to the original thing, if I go ahead and hide these icons here, you can see here's my original image. And then here, of course, is the new image with everything on it. So you can see it's some quite substantial changes. It's a lot more vibrant, a lot more beautiful looking. But we're not done yet. All right, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to use the spot healing brush to touch up this image. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom back in, and if you look in the background here, we have some nice lovely cows that are hanging out here for this mug shot. And so what we're going to do is we're going to remove these cows and take them out to pasture here. So let's go ahead and come down here to our different tools. So you can see we have all these different options. Now you can do healing directly on the image layer. However, it's not always recommended that you do that, because if you do that, it takes away some of your editing flexibility. So what we're going to do is actually create a new layer. And there's two ways we can do that. We can either come here to layer and click on new layer. Or the way I prefer to do it is I just go right here to where I just was, come down here and click on the new layer icon. It adds a new layer, and I'm just going to double click that so I can name it. And I'm going to call this the spot healing layer. Then I'm going to go over to my spot healing brush, which is right here underneath the eyedropper tool. And I click and hold, you can see that it's automatically right on the spot healing brush. So I'm going to leave that there. And I'm going to look up here and make sure my modes are set. So I have content aware, which is what I want it to be on, which means it's going to pull from surrounding pixels for information. And I also want to click this checkbox right here for sample all layers. Now, if you are doing just one layer, you don't want that checked. But since we have just one layer that actually has an image on and the rest are just filters, we want to make sure that that is checked there. All right. I can also use the left and right brackets to adjust the size of this. And I'm going to make it just slightly large enough so that when I click on this cow here, the cow is going to disappear. And I click it, and the cow is gone. I can do the same thing here. If I click, you can see that the cow has disappeared. All right. You can actually even drag around this if you want, and you can see Photoshop will make its best guess to kind of approximate stuff out. Like now the one thing you gotta watch out, like if I try to get this cow that's hiding up here by the barn, you can see that even though it removed that cow, you can see that it kind of filled it in with some of that grassy area there. So you'd have to be a lot more careful when you start working around buildings and poles and other sorts of things that are in your image. Now, personally, I like the cows in there, so I'm just going to add those back in. Now, see, I can't just Control-Z. This is one thing I want to point out. If I want to undo something in Photoshop more than once, I need to hold down Alt-Control-Z, which will allow me to take back multiple steps. Control-Z only does the last step. If you want to do more than one thing, you need to hold down Alt-Control-Z. So I'm going to keep it on the spot healing brush, but I'm going to get rid of these annoying lamp poles here. So I'm going to go ahead and skinify this brush stroke here. And I'm going to go ahead and paint over those poles. And you see that Photoshop has eliminated. Now there's still this wire that's walking around here, so I'm just going to kind of trace it over the wire. And you can see it got rid of that wire. I might have to say, well, I want that a little skinnier so it's pulling even less information, which of course I can do. And you can see it will remove that layer. I can go over here and get rid of some of these other poles in here, because I might say, well, these poles, while they're a necessity, are kind of a distraction. So I'm just going to go ahead and paint over them. And now they're not in my image anymore. There's even a person walking around back here. I can get rid of them as well. And there's this pole right here. Paint over that. You can see Photoshop does its best guess to try and eliminate it from the background using the information that is present here. Right. And there's a little bit left there, so we're just going to paint over. Now you can see there might be some spots that it doesn't do quite as good of a job on, and that's because it's doing a kind of a best guess here. All right. Let's go ahead and hold down the spacebar here, and we're going to drag our image in order to get rid of a couple more of these distracting poles. You can see there's quite a few of them here actually within this image. So I'm going to go ahead and just keep using that tool that I've been using. And there's another pole right here. And there's even, I think, one back over here. That gets rid of a good amount here, and you can see there's quite a few of them just hiding out throughout the image here. And you can spend your whole day cleaning these up. fact, I recommend that you do go through and you try to clean these poles up as best as you possibly can. You can see they are quite prolific in their hiding. There's a bunch of them right over here. However you choose to clean them up, you could, like I said, go through and clean all these up. It might take you a little bit of time to do it, just to get rid of all these distractions that are in your image. You might say, oh, I don't really like those in there. Well, this is one of the ways that you can remove those things within your image. Just do a Control-0. And I can, of course, you can see there's some poles over here. I'll leave you guys to go through and remove all those poles off of the image. All right, well, there's just a couple other things we're going to do here quick. Like, for example, I could clean up a whole bunch of different things in this image. Like, for example, I could be here all day clearing this up until it looks like nothing more than just a sea line and a bunch of houses. For example, like you have like the boat down here, so you could zoom in on the boat if you want and go to your spot healing brush and increase your brush stroke size so it covers that boat. So just a little more. And with a single click, you could eliminate that boat out of existence. Now, if I scroll up on my image here, you can see I have some things that aren't quite as beautiful looking. So, for example, there's this red roof right here that's just hiding over the hill. It's kind of a little bit of a distraction. If I were to try and use this current tool on it and struck over it, Photoshop does do a good job, but sometimes there are ways for Photoshop to do a better job. And what I'm going to do is Control-Z and go ahead and create a new layer, and I'm going to rename this. Because now what we're going to do is what is known as a patch. So this is our patch layer. And I'm going to go back over here to the spot healing brush, click and hold, and you can see I have the option for the patch tool. So I click on that, and we're going to be ready to do a patch. All right, let's patch this. So go ahead and with my cursor on with the patch tool selected, I'm just going to kind of draw around this roof here, all right, making sure that it is larger than the image I want to do, because if I don't select larger than the image, it could actually end up with some weird kind of ghosting of the previous image. So what I'm going to do is once I have that, I'm going to go here to my patch settings, and I want to look at the different things I have going on. So under here, I have patch right now set to normal. Instead, what I want to do is come and change it to content aware. And you can see that it changes it now, and I have sample all layers checked, which is what I want, because I want to pull from the original source. And we also have the thing for structure and color. We'll look at that in just a second here. And I'm going to, with the Alt key selected down, or not selected down, excuse me, I can just click on that patch. I can drag that around, and as I drag it, you see that Photoshop is trying to look through the image to find something that would fit to fill that gap there. So, for example, like right now, well, that doesn't look too bad. Kind of fits those trees a little bit. If I let go, you can see it will kind of put that in there. Now it looks a little blurry, so I can come in here and I can manipulate, for example, the structure elements. The larger the value is, the more it tries to use some of that existing image. The smaller the value, the less it's going to try to use it. So I'm just going to go ahead and leave it here. Right around 5 sounds good. I can also manipulate the color, which will affect the color from that original layer. And you can see that one thing with this patching tool is that it is very kind of blurry. Now, if I go ahead and do a Control-Z, you can see that it takes me back to my original thing. And maybe I said, well, I want a better patch. Well, I can just click off that, and maybe I can go ahead and surround this house a little tighter. And now I can use my patch tool. And as I drag that away, you can see that it is now filled in with some new images. So you can go ahead and find something that looks good based upon the information that you are collecting. Once I find something that's good, maybe I want these trees right here, so I can click and let go. And you can see that it will fill that information in based upon what it knows. And again, here's the structure and color images. And if I want to get off this, I can just simply click off, or I can go here to select and deselect. And then you can see that now that roof is gone and it has been filled in with this green patch here. All right, we're going to keep working with this image now. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to get it ready to apply a filter. So let's do a Control Z, or 0, excuse me, Control 0 to zoom this back out. And I'm going to go to my layers panel here, and I'm going to click on the patch layer, hold down the shift key, and click on layer 0. And you can see that all my layers are now selected. And what I'm going to do now is come up here to filter, and I'm going to click on convert for smart filters. Up here on this menu that comes up again, all it's just saying it's going to convert a small object. I just click OK, and you can see that now it's been condensed down. All right, so let's go ahead and apply a filter. So we go up here to filter, and you can see there's a bunch of filters available for us now. The one that we're going to want to do right now is out of the blur gallery, and you can see there's one for tilt shift. So I click on that, and you can automatically see that right away what it's done is it's hidden everything that's in the background here in the foreground. These are very blurry, where this is very crisp. And we can manipulate these values here if we want in order to really change some of that. So for example, if I want to increase the distortion, you can see that that distortion value as it increases will change those values there. If I want to change the blur, right now it's at 15 pixels. If I increase that, it makes those background pieces even blurrier. Right? So I'm going to change this back down to about 20 pixels. So 20 pixels. And there's also these guidelines here that I can click on that will affect the field of what I'm looking at. So if I expand this center one, you can see that it controls exactly what is in the most focused area. These ones between the solid line and the dotted lines are the semi-blurred areas, and then anything above or below these two sectors is the most blurry. Additionally, you have the tilt wheel here that you can go ahead and kind of manipulate around. So like if I hover over here, you can see I can actually change the angle of adjustment. So if I wanted to make this slightly an angle to match maybe that slight angle of the water, you can see it's a little bit more fickle. You can apply that adjustment there, so now it kind of follows along the edge of the water. And I might want to say, well, I want this top layer to come down a little bit. I can do that as well. Or maybe I want it to go up. And you can see as I do that, the image is adjusted. I'm going to go ahead and leave it right here for now. But I'm going to take the water up just a little bit. Once you're done messing around with all these different settings, the big thing is to go ahead and click on OK. Photoshop will then apply that filter for you. It might just take it a second to process all that information. And you can see that now you have the smart filter down here. Now, one thing to note that you can see it has this white patch panel here. So if I want to go ahead and, for example, use my brush tool and paint through some of those areas, like I might want these houses, for example, to not be as blurry, I can take my brush tool and paint over them in order to help bring them back into focus a little bit. Right? Simple as that. All right, our next thing to do is to go ahead and apply a black and white filter. Because oftentimes colors will have a tint to them, especially older filters, or photos, excuse me. So we're going to come right down here to our adjustments, and we're going to go to black and white. And you can see that by default, it automatically makes it into black and white. And I can adjust these individual values if I want. So for example, I can move the red slider. If I make it to the left, you can see all the reds in the color get darker. If I move the other way, they all get lighter. So I'm just going to kind of leave that as is. Now, the really cool thing is if you click this tint button right here, it applies a sepia effect. So like those really old school photos that you see kind of have that brown color to them. This is how you can do that. But I don't want necessarily just to leave it as a plain old boring brown. I'm going to click on the tint box right here. And you can see the color picker comes up. Maybe I want to make this something a lot more cool. So I'm going to go ahead and for my purposes, I'm going to pick something a little more blue. And I can play around with this. So I can make it any kind of shade of blue that I want. And this is how I can do that. So then I just click OK. And you can see here's my nice beautiful image. I'm just going to collapse that. Now let's say I want to change that. I can of course come and click on that icon right there, and it'll bring that back up for me to change. On your document, go ahead and pick a color of your choice. You don't have to make it this blue. You can make it a different color of your choosing. Just make sure that it's not so dark that you still cannot see the original image. All right, one of the last things we're going to do is we're going to sharpen. Now, I haven't saved in a while, so I'm going to go up here and go ahead and do that. So just save. And for now, I'm going to hide my black and white layer so I can see my original layer. So I'm going to click back on that smart object. And we're going to get ready to do some sharpening. All right, time to sharpen. Here we go. Up. And like I said, we already have our patch selected here. So if I come back up here to filter, because I'm applying another one, I go to sharpen. And there are numerous ways to do this in Photoshop, but today we're just going to look at the Smart Sharpen tool. And I'm going to just drag this a little bit so I can see just a little bit more of my image, because I want to make sure preview is on. I'm going to drag this over to, for example, this red house here so I can see it. Let me just zoom out just a little bit so I can see a little bit more of that house. And you can see I have different values in here. And as I mess around with these values, for example, if I make this a lot larger, you can see sometimes these images get really distorted, sometimes they do not. Might just take Photoshop a little bit of time to manipulate. There you go. You can see the image is slowly being changed there as it re-renders. The larger values make that contrast really pop out there. So I just want to leave these values low, so I'm going to make that at 2 pixels. And it re-renders it. If I slide the slider here for the amount, you can see that that also will affect the image. Once you have it to a value that you are happy with, you can go ahead and press the OK key. I'm going to leave this one about 100 and I'm going to do 150%. I'm going to just click on OK. And you can see everything now is going to be sharpened. All right. So my document is done now. So if I go ahead and reapply that filter, you can see there's my blue effect. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go here, I'm going to go File, Save. Now if I want to export this document, let's say as a actual picture file, I'm going to go ahead and come up here, go to File. I can do Save As instead of just go Save. Oh, it says it's still saving, so I have to wait a second here because it's at 97% saved. There it goes. So now I can do Save As. All right, and by default, it makes it a Photoshop file. If I click that drop down though, I have other options that I can do in here. So you can see here's JPEG, down here is PNG. So we can go ahead and, since it started as a JPEG, we can leave it as a JPEG. The other option that we can do, we can also do file export. We can do a quick export as PNG. Personally, I'm more preferable to PNG files because they support transparency better than JPEG does. So I'm just going to do a quick export as PNG. And if that doesn't work, you can, of course, always come up here to File, Save As. Both ways are acceptable ways of getting that to work. So here's Save As again. I'm just going to choose to leave it as a PNG file. And so Photoshop-intro PNG, I click on Save. When this menu comes up, just leave it as is and click OK. And Photoshop will tell you that the image is saving. Now, when you go ahead and when Photoshop goes ahead and finishes that, you want to make sure in Schoology you're uploading both this PSD file that you made here and your final PNG file. So that means if you're looking in here, and let me go to the appropriate folder here. So go to your Cat2 folder. You should be uploading both this PNG file and this intro PSD file. So both these files, please upload. I will be grading this one, but if I have any questions about the verification of what you made, I will then check this file. But that concludes this long lesson, folks. Until next time.